Time for business news now, and Stephen Carroll joins me in the studio. Good morning, Stephen.
Hi, Rochelle.
Now, we're starting with reports of major job cuts on the way at Ford.
The Wall Street Journal says the carmaker is planning to axe 10% of its workforce, which could be as many as 20,000 jobs. According to the newspaper, the move is part of a $3 billion cost-cutting plan aimed at increasing profitability. Ford's chief executive has been under pressure from the company's board over the 40% slump in the share price since he took over 3 years ago. The carmaker's value in that time has slipped behind that of rivals General Motors and Tesla. Job cuts expected to be confirmed later this week.
Now, Stephen, you've been keeping an eye on the price of oil, which has been rising in recent days.
That's after major producers Saudi Arabia and Russia backed a plan which would extend cuts to oil production. Moscow and the OPEC cartel agreed last November to cap the amount of oil they produced in an effort to boost prices. But a rise in US production had threatened to reduce the effects of that deal. The Russian and Saudi oil ministers pledged to do whatever it takes to reduce oversupply in the industry, a sentiment echoed by Vladimir Putin.
I feel optimism because our main partner in this process, and our main partner without a doubt, is Saudi Arabia. And they fully implement all the agreements that took place up to now. And secondly, and this is the most important, Saudi Arabia wants to maintain stable and fair prices for oil.
Well, that rally in oil prices is continuing in trading today. The international benchmark Brent crude up almost 0.5%, as you can see in trading there, just over $52 a barrel. Now, that's up more than 2% for the past week, and it's almost double the lows we saw in January of last year when the oil glut was at its peak. Gains on WTI as well. On the stock markets, London starting the day flat. We've got falls in Paris and Frankfurt. Car makers generally trading down after European car sales fell by more than 6% in April. Volkswagen seeing the biggest fall in sales. Their shares down around 0.5% in Frankfurt. In Asia, on the stock market, shares in China had fallen earlier in trading over worries about the country's banking sector. The central bank injecting more than 20 billion euros into the market to reduce the stress on lenders. Just seeing Shanghai turn into positive territory, though, towards the end of the trading day there. And we've got some small gains in Tokyo and in Seoul as well. Well, look, so that's some more of today's business headlines for you next. Disney says that hackers have stolen the upcoming Pirates of the Caribbean movie from their studio and are threatening to release it online if they're not paid a ransom. Chief Executive Bob Iger told ABC staff the company wouldn't pay the money. Cyber attack is separate from the so-called WannaCry ransom software affecting computers around the world since last week. The film is due to be released in the United States in 10 days' time. Vodafone has reported losses of 6.1 billion euros in the year to the end of March. That's largely down to a 3.7 billion write-down over the company's Indian business. Revenues fell too, though, by more than 4%, largely due to currency changes. The weaker British pound also affecting the low-cost airline EasyJet. It reported losses of over 275 million euros for the 6 months to the end of March. The carrier's earnings were hit by the weaker pound and the later Easter this year as well. Revenues at the airline were up by 3%, though, with total passenger numbers climbing to a record high of almost 34 million passengers, I should say. Shares down 4% in the company. And a judge in San Francisco has told Uber to stop using technology that an engineer took from Google's self-driving car unit, Waymo. The ruling said there was compelling evidence that a former Waymo employee had downloaded thousands of confidential files before leaving the company and then sold them to Uber. The ride-sharing firm has been allowed to continue its research into autonomous cars, though.
Right, finally, Stephen, in the US, 2 major newspapers could be heading for a merger.
The owner of the Chicago Tribune wants to buy its main rival in the city, and that's the Chicago Sun-Times. Rapports, which owns the Sun-Times, had been looking for an owner to keep publishing the title. The companies have told the Antitrust Division of the US Justice Department about the possible tie-up in case of any competition concerns. Rapports has been asked to advertise for any new potential buyers to flush out anyone else that might be interested in buying the newspaper. The Tribune's owner says it plans to keep the Sun-Times as a separate unit with an independent newsroom. A very strong editorial in the Chicago Tribune today arguing to why this is a good thing for Chicago and for the media in Chicago. The Sun-Times is one of those things that's a bit iconic. If you've been to the city, it's got that great building right in the centre of Chicago. That's one of the things you can't miss when you're visiting.
OK, Stephen, thank you so much for that. Stephen Carroll there with the Business Update.